I remember just for entertainment on the weekends when I was like 6 or 7, police would have to escort things like the milk truck and the bus just to pick up kids.
It's as bad as that.
Yeah, it was. And it's hard to believe in Australia.
I read and I've heard a conversation with your father, your dad, at some point about your grandfather did this, I did this, you've got to discover the next thing.
Conversation went something like, son, times are changing, crime's going to change, you're going to have to find the next frontier to evolve what we're trying to do, which is, again, what I was saying before about ideological struggle. It wasn't let's be gangsters or let's try and commit the biggest crimes we can commit. There was always some ideological energy behind it. I remember kind of convincing myself to say, I will be an organized criminal and I'll be good at it.
But it did take a turn, didn't it? The type of crime, because of other people that you met. Tell me a little bit about that.
I kind of clocked this guy walking down the street in the middle of the city. He looked at me and my friend and he goes, do you guys want to make some money? And being in that situation, 15, you go into school from a homeless hostel. Your dad, your uncles, your grandfather, everyone on that side is in prison. It's no surprise that I was at least curious, and I said, yeah, sure, like how? And he said to me, for every card like this that you bring me, I'll pay you $1,000.
Up until this point, everything that you thought about and were doing was criminally driven. Why did you see an opportunity that no doubt became your career?
On his computer, he's got a 3G portable dongle that you can get access to the internet with, but he's got a condom around it. And I'm like, why does this guy have a condom on his computer? And I asked him, I'm like, why is there a condom on your computer? And he goes, well...
Welcome to the Second Chance podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Rowe. On this podcast, we talk to people from diverse backgrounds who share their stories of redemption, resilience, and second chance. Go to our YouTube channel so you can watch those interviews, subscribe, share, and click on the notification bell so you don't miss an episode.
Jamie, thanks for coming into the studio, the new setup for the Second Chance podcast. But not only have you come into the studio, you're here from Sydney, Australia.
Yep.
What brought you to London?
So we have some customers here that I caught up with, and we also had an event that you were also at last night with Meat Magic, and obviously to see you.
And you're the sponsor of Meat Magic, one of the sponsors.
Right. Yeah.
It's easy for me to describe you today as a successful businessman who set up I don't even know how to describe it, a cybersecurity. How would you describe it?
My company, we're a cybersecurity company. We do ethical hacking and cybersecurity defense for customers.
Ethical hacking?
Yeah.
As opposed to illegal hacking?
Yeah, as opposed to unethical.
But that's where your story starts, or at least where it turns. Take me back, Jamie, to who you used to be. So as a young man growing up in Australia, life wasn't easy for you at the beginning. Why is that?
Yeah, so in Australia, like everyone around the world thinks of Australia like, the best economy, and it's such a, we've got the best life. There is quite a lot similar to England of poverty. And so I grew up dealing with some of the secondhand effects of poverty. So growing up in Housing Commission, which would be a housing estate in England, and, living in those environments, you're generally going to be exposed to everything that comes with it. So, the drug abuse around you, the alcoholism, the domestic violence. And so there was a lot of that that I was surrounded by in the beginning.
And when you say surrounded by it, was it affecting your immediate family or just the community, i.e. your friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like if I think back, the earliest memory that I have of my family as a unit, probably I would have been 4 or 5. And one of my earliest memories is visiting my father in prison in Sydney. And what happened then was, I'd see him, and then pretty much straight after that memory, my mum moved away to this faraway place. It's like 12 hours from Sydney. It's called Lismore. It's like a country town. A lot of Indigenous communities, and they have their own struggles with poverty and whatnot. And so it was directly felt by me. So it wasn't just people around me. My family's, experience a lot of those challenges with drug abuse, crime, and I don't think, they've ever set out to go through that. It's just a circumstance of the surrounding and all the other factors.
One of the factors, as you would describe it, is your father. And you mentioned that, one of your earliest memories was going to prison to visit your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to talk too much about your dad because I'm more interested in your story. But your dad has a notorious background, a notorious history or connection with biker gangs, I think it is. Tell me a bit about your father's history, because I suppose that shapes a lot of your life as you're growing up.
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, like, I didn't really know what was happening until I was around 12. But the reality is that my grandfather was, from a young age, caught up in different forms of organized crime. That's no secret. Like, that's been covered by media. And then naturally his sons, who are my uncles and my father, were also caught up in that world. And as you said, it did have a pretty profound impact, not just negatively. Like, there was, as we might cover, there's a lot of positive impacts being exposed to stuff like that have had.
People will find that hard to believe, but it's true. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because people often just want to dismiss it quite quickly. I grew up in a family that were bad and they were criminals, but I broke the cycle, if that's what you went on to do. But it's interesting that you've already highlighted that there are some positives growing up in an organized crime family, but I interrupted.
Yeah, no. And I think the point is, I don't think, and I've spoken to them about this a lot, like, even though there are references in media saying organized crime, it was never really a thing that was spoken about to say, okay, we're an organized crime family. There was always just a struggle. The struggle was, this is my objective. This is not something that people have told me. This is how I saw it. There was a struggle of, like, economic situation and hardship, and, crime was, from what I saw, just a way for people around me to kind of catch up with the rest of the world, and have a fair fighting chance, if you will. So it was more ideological than just driven by materialistic things, is how I kind of received it. Not sure if that was the intended message, but yeah.
And what was that notoriety? When we talk about organized crime, not the details of the crimes, but how did it manifest itself to become something that people become aware of, communities became aware of? Because as I've read, your family and the families you were connected with and involved with had reputations. What can you tell me about that from your perspective as someone growing up within that family, within that environment, even if you weren't living with?
I think I really only understood the gravity of that when I was like around 12 or 13, when I moved back with my father. Before that, there was always hints of, like, there was always this mysteriousness about, you go to school as a young kid and all the kids talk about, oh, what does your father do? What do your parents do for work? And then coming from a memories of, visiting him in prison, kids understand why people go to prison, right? And so I didn't really see much firsthand. It was just stories. So you hear stories like, before I was 10, like from ages like 5 to 10, I was very interested, like, where is my dad? Where is my family? And my mother used to tell me stories. And this is coming back to answer your question, what did I know of it and what it was? I the stories that I were told were, your father's started out as a well-known car thief in his local area. His father was a bodyguard to some of Australia's more notorious old school criminals from back in the 70s and 80s. I believe my grandfather started as like a doorman, and then he got involved in some of like the more well-known Australian criminals, being like protection for them. And that's how I believe they kind of started to build a name in that world.
And what about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Because being, in that environment, as you said, living in the Housing Commission, as it's called in Australia, and the challenges that you faced, were you able to resist falling in line and do something different at such a young age? Were you going to school and trying to get the right grade so you could break the cycle and get out? What was you doing at this point?
That's a good question. I know very early on, I realized that not just I, but everyone in that community, in that housing commission, was disadvantaged in different ways. And it was something very early on that I realized, living with my mother, watching her struggle mentally, financially, it really deeply put this kind of thing inside me where I did want to strive to grow up and just fix that situation through any means. And I didn't think that crime was a pathway or anything back then. Like it was just me being cognizant of the reality, which was that, okay, we're living much worse off than most people in the country. Obviously, there's poverty all around the world and it comes in different flavors. But for Australia, just to give you an example, like the neighborhood that I lived in to this day in Lismore has a well-known reputation of being like one of Australia's worst ghettos. It's definitely cleaned up now, but I remember just for entertainment on the weekends when I was like 6 or 7, we lived in this suburb called Goonellabah, and this area that we lived in, this specific area, police would have to escort things like the milk truck and the bus just to pick up kids.
It's as bad as that.
Yeah, it was. And it's hard to believe in Australia because, if that happened today, it ends up on the news. I just don't think that there was that much spotlight on it back then. So that was around me, and that plants a very early seed deep inside me of, I want to fix this. This isn't, I don't want to like feel this feeling.
But it didn't. It shaped you differently. And I say that because I read and I've heard a conversation with your father, your dad, at some point about, your grandfather did this, I did this, you've got to discover the next thing. Just share with me what I think is quite an extraordinary conversation. It probably takes place in many households, in criminal households, but it's just extraordinary that a father, I think, most people might find that a father is trying to say to their kid, do better than me, get your education, move on.
Right.
But that wasn't the conversation that you had with your father.
It wasn't. And if you don't mind, I might just explain, before that happened, there was a big leap, because growing up, any normal kid who is under 10 years old, whether they grow up around crime or not, humans, like I believe we've got this instinct where what's right and wrong in a lot of cases. And all the movies growing up, you watch the bad guys on the Van Damme or Rambo or like Stallone movies, and usually the bad guys are the drug dealers, the nightclub owners. So I knew, because the time you're talking about is when I was around 13 years old. But for the first 10 years of my life, I had nothing to do with crime. I thought the world was just black and white. There was cops and robbers, and that's how things worked. But back to the conversation that you're talking about is, once I'd been exposed for about a few months into what my dad actually was doing for a living, we're standing on a street, and we've just walked out of the strip club, which was his business, and we're drinking a protein shake, and he turns to me and kind of, he's looking into the distance, and you can tell he's thinking about it. And he said, son, when I was your age, I had this conversation with my father, And the conversation was, you know, my grandfather was involved in like underground casinos and more old school type crime in those days, in the 70s and 80s. And what he was trying to get at was his father had a conversation with him when he was my age of 13. And the conversation went something like, you know, son, times are changing, you know, crime's going to change. You're going to have to find the next frontier to kind of evolve what we're trying to do, which is, again, what I was saying before about that ideological struggle. It wasn't let's be gangsters or let's try and commit the biggest crimes we can commit. There was always some ideological energy behind it. And so he said to me, my father said to me, you know, son, you're going to have, that time's going to come for you where you're going to have to come to me and kind of introduce me to that new world, whatever that may be. And, you know, I've actually asked him about this now once we're older, and he kind of regrets saying that to me, but it happened, right? And yeah, it's interesting.
And it's context, isn't it? Because in some people's eyes, it might be shocking to think that a parent is saying to their child, but I suppose it happens all the time, where a parent shares their experience. You know, I don't know, it could be a footballer who says to his son or daughter, you know, I made it, you can make it. You know, you just got to develop new skills. You know, dribblers of the ball are better these days, or the fitter and faster you are, the more chance you will be of success. So a criminal family's parent saying to a child, you know, you've got to come up with the next innovative crime. But I suppose the big question is, did you then, you know, you're living with your father in his environment and his lifestyle, and you mentioned you were leaving the strip club when he had that conversation with you. Where did your life go after that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because it was so conflicting. On one hand, there was conversations I'd have with my father and my grandfather where they'd be like, you know, you've got to do things the right way, you've got to go to school. But then there'd be complete polar conversations where they would say stuff like that. And I think back to your point too about, I don't think that they were trying to, objectively looking at it from the outside, they weren't trying to create the next generation of criminal or anything like that. For most conversations, it was clear that they wanted me to not have to do what they were doing. However, there was one distinct conversation or comment I remember that was said at a table, and it was kind of said in passing, but it was to the effect of, well, you know, you're not going to be a rocket scientist, so if you can't be good, then be good at it. And that's kind of, even though that was a joke potentially, and when it was said at the table, as a 13-year-old who had an already complicated relationship with my father growing up, not being able to see him, whatever they said, I kind of, I took it as a sponge, you know, like I took it literally, even if it was said as a joke. And to answer your question, I was set in my mind that I would be evolving into an organized criminal. And that was increased when, after about 6 months after that conversation that he had with me, he was arrested along with my grandfather and all my uncles. And so what that did to me mentally was like, I victimized myself even more, saying, okay, well, if all these ideologies that I've been listening to people say about the government and how they don't want people to succeed and whatnot, it's kind of enhanced now because the government just took away all my positive male role model figures. And so I remember kind of convincing myself to say, I will be an organized criminal and I'll be good at it. And I kind of mentally told myself that.
Before you tell me what happened next, you know, I can't stop thinking about you saying you had a complicated relationship with your father and you never got to see your father very much. And was that explained in what you've just said there, in that he went to prison, arrested with your uncles and whatnot? So was that more why your relationship with your father was more challenging than other kids, or was there more behind it?
Yeah, there was more. So when he went to prison when I was a teenager, when I was 13, that's different. But originally, when I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm only seeing him once every couple of years when my mother brings us back to Sydney, that's where it was kind of complicated. Where, and I can think about this too because I've got a son now. I've got 3 kids. You know, I would look at like his arms. There'd be needle marks on his arm, and that does something to a kid. I didn't know what drugs were, but I knew that he used to say he was sick, right? And I knew that that had something to do with why he was in prison the first time when I was 6. And yeah, I did miss him a lot. And I remember living in Lismore, far away from everybody else with my mother, when my mother would have domestic abuse issues with my stepfather. Or like, you know, my stepfather would, you know, lock me in a room smoking marijuana with 5 of his friends, and I'm like 6 years old. I'd think, you know, where the fuck's my dad? Like, where are they? So when I say complicated, that's how it was complicated. As a kid, I wish he would just, you know, come and rescue me. That was the complication there. So kind of, when I was older as a teenager and I reconnected with him and I saw the strip club and I saw all this stuff, it was much easier for me to look past that because all that I wanted to do was be with my father, as any young boy would.
And I'm hearing that it was, you know, complication with drugs and alcohol dependency that not only disrupted your relationship with your father, you mentioned holes in his arms, you know, needle pricks, which suggests that he was addicted to heroin or some other substance, domestic violence in your parents' house. So a challenging time. How does Jamie, as a young teenager now, navigate in those trials and tribulations with the households that you're going between, your dad's and your mum's, your desire to become involved in organised crime because that's all you've seen around you? What was the first criminal thing you did?
I remember I was in year 8 in school, and there was a shop outside our school about 10 meters away from the school. It was like a petrol station. And at the time, I would have been like 13 or 14 years old. And I remember in the area that the school was, there was a lot of housing estates around that local area. So a lot of these kids came to this school, this high school, and a lot of their parents had somewhat similar, you know, backgrounds and exposure to crime and whatnot, as I did. Being an inner city school, there's an area called Glebe. It's quite well known for like, you know, some well-known criminals and whatnot. And so I remember one day walking into this petrol station, and there was kids in there who did come from like tough backgrounds, and they were taking, like, one of them was keeping the counter staff preoccupied, and the other ones were just filling their bags full with like candies and drinks and you know, and they'd go to school and just hand it out to all the other kids. And I remember, first of all, I couldn't believe my eyes because I was like, how are they just doing this so easily? And again, thinking of the whole situation, you know, my father's in prison. I've kind of already told myself I think I'm going to be a criminal. And so I remember I shoplifted this like Gatorade or some type of drink, right? And what was really interesting when I look back this objectively is that I became so, you know, I looked at it so deeply. To give you an example, I went to my stepmother, who I was living with at the time, my father's girlfriend, who kept custody of me when he first went to prison. I went back home that day after I stole that first drink, and I said to her, I need a new school bag. And the reason that I needed a new school bag was because my original bag was a backpack, but that's not ergonomically good for shoplifting. What I wanted was a side bag with a zipper, so I could easily have the less distance traveled from a product going from the shelf to my bag. And that kind of, there's a lot of that type of criminal, like, even though it's petty crime, like there's a lot of elemental thinking that I use later in life in a good way. But that was the first time that I actually did something illegal. And after that, it kind of, like, I was at a shopping center just a few months after that. And I remember standing in the Westfield in like the computer games part. And like, PlayStation had a device back then called a PSP, a PlayStation Portable. I didn't have one. And so I don't even know why I was trying to take a PSP game if I didn't have a PSP to play it on. But I've stood there for like 30 minutes just loitering while another one of my friends from school had already took something and left. And like I didn't want to do it, but then I did at the same time. And so I've taken it out of the packet and put it down my pants. And when I was walking out of the shopping center, the security, actually someone walked up to me and said, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to?" And as soon as he said that, he grabbed me and he said, "Come with me." And I was under 18 at the time, so they were quite lenient on, the repercussions there. I may have went to like a local court to do that. But after that, kind of in the same teenage years, like I was quite angry, and didn't know how to deal with my emotions of everything that was going on. And so like I'd get into a lot of like street fights, and there was a lot of like, in terms of criminal history, most of the things that I've had to go to court for are related to like fighting and whatnot.
Did you ever end up in prison as a young teenager?
No, I went to like a children's or like a youth court a couple of times, but luckily or unluckily or thankfully, I didn't know.
But it didn't stop there, did it? I mean, your involvement in criminality, because from what I understand, you know this elementary thinking that you did in your shoplifting, one in the bag because it was less time travel, which I think is fascinating and interesting. But it did take a turn, didn't it? Your the type of crime because of other people that you met. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so at the time, I was in year 8. I would have been 14 or 15 years old. And at the time, I was traveling to school from like a homeless hostel that my mother was living in. And was standing at I've decided that day I'm not going to go to school, because at that point, it was like, I go to school, they're talking about long-term benefits and studying and your long-term career. Everything in my life was short-term. There was no thinking about long-term anything. So I kind of unofficially stopped going to school. And I'm standing in the middle of the street, and like growing up around crime, what dodgy characters look like. So I kind of clocked this guy walking down the street in the middle of the city. I've got one of my friends with me who didn't go to school that day as well, Daniel. And I said to Daniel next to me, I'm like, "Hey, bro, watch out. This guy's going to do something. I don't know what, but just the demeanor and the way he's walking to us and how like we kind of crossed eyes 50 meters down the street. I know he's going to approach us." So the guy walks up to us, and we were like smoking cigarettes. And he's like, "Do you guys have a lighter or a cigarette?" We shared that. And he's like, he looked at me and my friend, and he goes, "Do you guys want to make some money?" And being in that situation, 15, you go into school from a homeless hostel. Your dad, your uncles, your grandfather, everyone on that side is in prison. It's no surprise that I was at least curious, and I said, "Yeah, sure, like how?" And what this guy said to me, he said, "If you can take a piece of mail from a letterbox, I'll pay you $1 for every piece of mail that you can get." And immediately I just started questioning, like, why? Keep in mind, this is 2005, so obviously it was some type of fraud. I could kind of calculate that much. But in 2005, fraud, at least on the ground, wasn't like digitally enabled fraud and cybercrime wasn't that well known and well kind of combated. So I asked him, why would you pay $1 for junk? Like, if I just go and get some junk mail out of a mailbox, are you really going to pay me $1? And he explained, no, it's got to have personal details on it because we use it to commit fraud and whatnot. I said I wasn't interested in that. And then he told me there is one other thing, but he said, I don't think you guys are ready for that. And naturally, I kind of took that as a challenge, and just curiosity got the better of me. And I was like, well, what is that other thing? And he said to me, he pulls out this envelope and he takes out like a bank card, like a debit card. And he said to me, for every card like this that you bring me, I'll pay you $1,000. I'm like, well, where am I supposed to get a card like that? And what is that card? And he explained to me that he would go around to students like me, tell them to empty out all the money from their cards, and then sell the card to him with their PIN number, but just no money. And again, I asked, why would you be buying blank cards for $1,000? I wasn't like a hardened criminal at that point. Like I couldn't put two and two together that maybe he'd want to put stolen funds into these cards and launder money because he had a PIN to be able to cash it out from the ATM. I couldn't calculate that. So kept asking questions. And he said to me, look, you asked way too many questions. Just come and meet me at 11:30 tonight. I'll show you how it works. I go to the station at 11:30. He walks up to this ATM. He does something. I can't see because I'm standing away from it. He walks back to me with an envelope, and it's got like $1,000 in $50 notes. And I'm like, what the hell just happened there? And I'm like, also, shouldn't you be running because you've just robbed a bank, as far as you've explained to me? And he's like, no, just wait. It's 11:30 now. We wait till 12:05. Didn't know. He was kind of not telling me the details that was going on. 12:05 hits. He walks back to the ATM. He takes out another $1,000. And he's like, that's what I was waiting for. And just to explain what was happening is, the ATMs had a standard daily limit of like $1,000. And back in those days, it's a bit different to now, where your daily limit would be calculated on like a calendar clock. So once midnight passes, it's considered a new day. Mm-hmm. Some new ATMs these days, they calculate it between a 24-hour period from your last withdrawal. So yeah, he showed me that, and it really blew my mind.
Was the debit card that he was using to draw money from the ATM?
Yeah.
Was it the overdraft money that he was pulling out because they cleaned out? Am I reading that right? He's got an empty bank account that belongs to someone, but they have an overdraft, so he's drawing money out from their overdraft.
No, what I found out later was that he just said plainly it was ghost money. What I found out later was he was part of like a Chinese triad, like a crime gang, and they had many, many other ways to steal money from different places. And so they were using his ability to get empty cards as a money laundering operation. So he would buy a blank empty card from a student. He'd go back to his gang. His gang would be doing things like internet banking fraud, hacking internet banking accounts. Once they've hacked someone else's account, their online banking, they can send that money from the hacked bank account to this empty student card. And then that way they can turn stolen internet money into a cash, like card.
But that would have been traceable, right? Is that traceable? But then the student would be picked up, but the criminal long gone.
It would have definitely, and it was traceable. And what he would kind of instruct people like me to do, and other students he approached, would be wait for 2 or 3 days and get the student to call the bank saying that they lost their card. And I remember seeing like people that were around him that were doing it for him, and hearing stories where they would say, like, one of the students would come back to him and say, hey, the bank called me, what should I do? And nothing ever happened. Like, the bank just wrote it off as like a loss.
Because it's not their money, it's money just being laundered through. And is that what you then did? So he showed you what to do, this ghost thing?
So I really wanted to do that. But I remember a conversation that I had, and this is where it was kind of beneficial to be around some more seasoned criminals, listening to how they work and how they look at opportunities. And I remember before all this happened, when I was a bit younger, talking to someone, maybe it was one of my father's friends or someone else, and they'd always tell me, like, don't be a mug, don't be a puppet for someone else. If you're going to do something wrong, at least make sure you've got the best, or evaluate your position in the whole hierarchy and make sure you're not getting used. So when I looked at what this guy was doing, coming to me to ask me to go and get student cards, I felt like that was already at the end of the chain. And I thought to myself, well, I could easily just go and do what he's doing by recruiting people rather than actually going to the, find just one student myself. And so I asked him, the guy, how did you learn how to do it? And the reason that I asked him that is because I wanted to kind of go to the source and meet the people who taught him the skills. I remember going home that night and I was thinking to myself, like, if I could do what he just showed me, I've solved all my problems. I've solved problems for my mother. I've solved problems for my whole family. Because I could literally then just try and print money. And I asked him, so to answer your question, no, I didn't do that for him, but I asked him who he learned it from because I wanted to learn that and more skills.
What was the skill you wanted to learn, though? Because, I mean, yeah. I get that, but that money that is being pushed through those emptied accounts obviously belonged to some organization, the cyber hackers or whatever you call them, who were laundering that money into this account. And once he drew it out, it wasn't his to keep, was it? Unless he owned the whole organization, he had to then feed that money back to whoever it was at the top of that ladder. So that was never going to be his or yours if you did go down that line, but you didn't go down that line.
No, what was fundamentally the lesson that it taught me, and I couldn't put this into words back then, but I have been able to when I retrospectively look at it. What he did was he showed me that, and this is kind of a saying that you can use as well, sometimes the only difference between what you don't have and what you need or what you want is digits on a screen. Right. And literally that's what he showed me. He's like, he can do some magic to take a blank card, somehow fill those zeros with numbers through like hacking another bank account or whatever it was. But he showed me a 0 and a 1. And if I could move things from a 0 to a 1 the same way he did, then I would be better off. So yeah, he told me that he learned all this from these Chinese triads, and that's who I then sought out to try and learn what he learned, because he wasn't Chinese himself. He was like Irish. He was actually originally a backpacker. And so I thought, I could do what he's doing. I don't have to work for him. I could actually just go one step above him and get in with these people.
You thought you could, or did you do that?
I actually did. So I sought them out back in those days in Sydney. If anyone's grown up there, they would know this. There was quite a lot of, and this is documented in media from back in those times, there was a lot of problems with street gangs. So like Asian street gangs predominantly in the city. And I think there's some correlation between like mass migration from Hong Kong during that time, why there was so many like disenfranchised young kids hanging around the streets. But it was quite easy to find where they hang around. So they'd hang around in like gaming arcades and whatnot. And so you go to the gaming arcade, you hang around for long enough. What they would do is because it's in the city, you've got this mixture of, predominantly Asian background people who, they're not coming from money, most of them. Most of these like Asian kids who were a bit older than me, they're coming from like troubled backgrounds as well. But they've got older guys who do have active contacts in Hong Kong, or who are coming back and forth and using them as like a kind of foothold in Australia. And what they would do is they would take like private school kids that were walking around the city, who will dress in their nice like private school clothes, and they'd get them to go credit card shopping. So they'd somehow steal credit cards from other places through skimming and different ways. and they'd generate like a fake ID and a credit card, and they'd send these private school kids into like the Myers and the David Jones and the Westfield shopping centers to buy like white goods. So iPods, MP3 players, laptops, and they'd sell them for half price. So I saw that, and I'm observing, I'm trying to get into this group. So I'm like, okay, well, I could do that. There was another thing that they would do is they'd gather like teenagers to go to these like kind of all-in brawls with other Asian street gangs. And so they'd be recruiting for that type of stuff as well. And I'm like, well, I wasn't afraid to have a punch up, like a fight. So I'll try that as well. So started hanging around them. They'd ask, we need you to go and do this, go fight this group of people, take your friends. Just like most gangs, like you start as an associate and you're not officially like marked into the gang at that stage. Mm-hmm. And it got so kind of funny that there were a time where people were just walking up to these Asian guys in these like gaming arcades, and they'd be like, oh, can I join the gang? And they're like, yeah, come along to the next fight and you're in, So it was kind of childish in some ways, but it did evolve after that.
I want to talk about your hacking, mm-hmm. because you become known as somebody or it's known that you were a hacker. And some of what you talked about is how people hack into people's accounts, whether it's taking posts, mm-hmm. nicking their identities, using it in some way, and then it become digitized and people are doing digitized. What specifically did you do as a hacker that then led to you using that skill for these, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, mm-hmm. ethical cyber security?
So I met a guy through, it was a mixture of the Asian gangs, because he was also involved with them, because he was valuable to them because of his hacking abilities. Probably 10, 15 years older than me. And funnily enough, I also had connections to this guy through some of my father's friends. And this guy was known, there's like news articles and whatnot of him trying to like hack ATMs and different things like that around Sydney. And I remember meeting him and sitting with him for a couple of hours. And one of the things I remember at first, I walked into his apartment and he's got his laptop on his table. And prior to this, I'd never really seen the back end of what all these gangs were doing. I was just seeing the front end where they'd go shopping with the cards and they'd do the fraud. I never saw the back of house operations. Mm. This guy was like the one-man army for some of these Asian gangs. He was running the back end resources. So I walked into his apartment. He's got his laptop on his table. It's in the middle of the city, like level 50. There's apartments all around. And next to him is a window. He's got the window open of the apartment. And down on the ground is like a courtyard with thousands of apartment blocks around it. So on his computer, he's got a 3G dongle, like a Wi-Fi portable dongle that you can get access to the internet with. Mm. But he's got a condom around it. And I'm like, why does this guy have a condom on his computer? And I asked him, I'm like, why is there a condom on your computer? And he goes, well, it's for operational security, or he said OPSEC. And what he meant was he was accounting for the fact that because of what he was involved in, it was a very real possibility that police would kick in his door. And so it was a kind of self-preservation attempt for him to have this condom around his dongle, because on the computer itself, he was doing a lot of other things where if he just turns the power off to the computer, it'll wipe everything. But the one thing he couldn't delete instantly was the fact that that dongle is associated with a name, albeit a fake name, and it's associated with internet history that if the police got the two together, would be incriminating enough to say that he did a certain thing at a certain time on the internet. Mm-hmm. However, if it's in a condom and he flicks the condom out of the USB out of the window, and it hits the ground, and this is the first time I heard what this clause or this word, he said plausible deniability, which means that if this was facing a court of law, you could plausibly deny that because you didn't have any fingerprints on the 3G dongle and the dongle wasn't found together with the computer, it takes a split second to throw that out the window before the door gets completely kicked in, you know? And so that's how I first...
And so, right, so just so that I'm clear, the condom is to prevent his fingerprints being in the dongle when he snatches it out and throws it out the window. And that's the only purpose, the condom. I thought you were going to say something like the condom stops, the technology or so. So there's no clever thing other than to prevent So you could put anything around it, really, and condoms, because this is new to me, condoms therefore don't capture fingerprints. DNA, if they went so far as to try and get the DNA, if you touched it, they could probably, but it'd be a long shot.
No, well, if you think about it, if he's got this dongle from a telephone store, depending on how he got it, they usually come in a cardboard box. So he could have opened the cardboard box, and this is what he explained to me later, not in these exact words, but I can deduct this. He'd get open the cardboard box either with tweezers or tongs or really anything, pick the dongle up, capture the dongle in the condom, and then just use it. So at no point in...
So your DNA and fingerprints don't transfer onto a condom?
Well, no, I don't know if they do or don't transfer, but...
Oh, so he would flick it out of the condom. Yes, oh, right. I thought window with condom.
No,
Moving on.
Yeah.
Now we've resolved the best use of a condom. You became a hacker.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you learned from this guy, the condom man, I'm going to call him. What did you learn from him?
So he explained to me that he was facilitating a lot of the information that the Asian gangs were using to hack the accounts or steal money. And what that means is he had contacts in Eastern Europe that were infecting computers all around the world, millions and millions of computers. That's all they did. And what they didn't have, these Eastern European hackers, as was explained to me, is they didn't have boots on the ground in all the countries for all the computers they were infecting. So
when you say infecting a computer, what do you mean? I'm taking it as a kind of virus that disrupts how you use
So back in those days, there was a very, very popular type of computer virus called a banking Trojan. And a banking Trojan was a piece of software or a virus that was specifically written to do a couple of things. It would capture internet banking credentials. So when they would infect 1 million Australian computers through all different methods, email, putting bad links online, when they would infect that lot of computers, they'd need a way to actually make money from them. So they designed this special type of software called a banking Trojan. And originally the banking Trojans were really simple. They'd just take the username and password for the internet banking account, and then the Eastern Europeans would then share that with local hackers who would then try and log in. When the banks detected weird logins happening to all these accounts, the software or the virus creators, the authors, had to evolve the way they wrote the banking viruses. And what they ended up doing was they had this concept called a web inject. And what that means is, instead of just stealing the victim's username and password for their banking account, it will wait until they send a real transaction. And what happens is, let's say Joe, his computer's infected with banking Trojan. He wants to send $500 to his friend Alice. When he clicks send, the banking malware will activate. It's been sleeping for months, waiting for this one transaction that was about to be sent. When Joe hits send $500, the banking Trojan actually throws something else up on the front of the screen and captures the details that he was going to send it to Alice and sends it to their own account. But to him, it just shows it's normally going to Alice. Now, the reason they did that is because the banks started introducing things like 2FA or multi-factor authentication. So if you want to send $500 to Alice, you're going to get an SMS on your phone, saying, hey, you're sending $500 to Alice. Do you approve? And so by kind of doing that background work with the malware, it was more believable. It only sent the stolen funds at the same exact time that they were trying to send funds themselves. Because if it's 3 a.m. and you're lying in bed and you get a message from your bank, you're going to be suspicious. And so, this guy was involved with these Eastern Europeans, the guy that I met with the condom, and he explained to me how he was like the bridge between the people with the information, who were the Eastern Europeans, and the people that could monetize the information, who were the Asian crime gangs that were local in the country. And he was like that bridge. And how that turns into me hacking is that I saw, even though he was quite a skilled hacker himself, he had kind of reserved himself where these Eastern Europeans had so many computers infected, he didn't have to hack anymore. He'd just serve as the bridge in information, sharing. And I noticed that he was reliant on the Eastern Europeans. So if he wanted to get stolen driver's license details or, Medicare numbers, credit cards, he would have to rely on the Eastern Europeans to give that to him. I saw an opportunity where I was like, well, at the end of the day, he's just looking for information. Like the Asian gangs, they're looking for information.
Mm.
If I can learn a way to get information, whether it's creating banking computer viruses or learning how to hack, either of those ways, I can then replace both the bridge, the guy, and the Eastern Europeans and just go directly to the Asians. That's how I first kind of pushed myself into learning how to hack.
And did that? And is that what you did?
Well,
you stole people's information and details and, I don't know, passed it on to the Asians, sold it to the Asians?
No, and I'm lucky in a sense that every idea, because most of the ideas that I had were quite like grandiose, I'm lucky in the sense that every time that I had the opportunity to do that, the other side of the equation just wasn't there to meet me. And so I had access to a lot of information because I had to learn how to get it. And so I was able to, hack a large bank and then see the information that they had in their database. But the difference was, as soon as I figured out that people weren't going to work with me on that, I was like, well, I'll just take it to the bank. And it got to the stage where, stupidly, in some stupid idea, I thought this would work. I emailed the CIO of the bank, who I got the details from the database that I'd just been able to expose. And then he didn't reply. So then I went to a phone box. Again, it's like something from a cheesy movie. I SMS'd him from the phone box, and you could only fit 50 words into the message. And I'm like, I am the guy trying to send you information. Email is this, thinking that, they were going to be so amazed that I'd been able to hack this bank that they would give me a job, right? And I didn't know you could work in security like that yet at that stage, but I'd already kind of thought, well, hold on. If they pay people to do security, then they should also pay people who can find holes in their security.
Right. So that was quite a turning point for you in the sense that up until this point, everything that you thought about and were doing was criminally driven, even if you hadn't committed any hacking crimes per se. And I'm sure there were things you did do that we don't have the time to explore. But that going into a phone box, that sending a message to the CIO of the bank, was you sort of saying that you could, if hacking the way that you did, commit a crime, but in an ethical way, to show them that, they can be exposed, and you've seen it for yourself, people fleecing money from people's details. Why did you see an opportunity that no doubt, became your career?
Yeah, so it was far from a noble choice. It was really due to the fact that the guy with the condom, I had this great master plan. After watching him operate, I saw a inefficiency in his whole system, and I was like, what if I could design this super fraud system where the problem was, when he was getting accounts from Eastern Europe, he'd have to then find local people to cash out. But there's only a certain type of person who's going to walk into a bank and take out $80,000 cash, knowing what they're doing. You can't trick someone into saying, because they've got to walk in with fake ID. I had this idea in my head where I would design, I even gave it a name in a very entrepreneurial type of way, and I called it Fraud Hub. And my idea, thankfully, which never got off the ground, was to approach this guy, pitch him on Fraud Hub. And what Fraud Hub would have been is this online system, a peer-to-peer network where like hackers around the world could connect with local people in every country who were willing to commit the fraud. And if you've ever seen like a Jason Bourne movie or like a Hitman movie like John Wick, you know, when they get an order, oh, okay, there's a job that's come up, who's going to take it? The first person to take it. And this is before any of these sites like Airtasker or sites like that, who now are used commonly for like handyman who needs a job done.
Right, okay.
And I remember trying to meet this guy at like 6 a.m. We'd agreed to meet at this one location, and I stood there for 4 hours on the main road in this part of Sydney. And I was like in a really bad situation. I needed this to work. He didn't show up. It turns out he had a psychotic episode because he was also on drugs. And I kind of left that, which is where I got more into like just directly trying to work with the companies.
So it wasn't dictated by your wanting to do good. It's because you fouled trying to do bad, as in hack, nick people's money, identities. That didn't work for you in the way you hoped it would. So you saw the other side. Am I right in thinking that's how you approached it?
I would say that the grandiose ideas that I had, no one wanted to try them because they were too far-fetched.
Right.
Even though they would have worked. And so what really was one of the biggest changes for me is I did find a flaw in this US gaming company. At the time, they were the largest online game in the world. And I found some of these major security flaws, and I just sent an email off. And back in those days, even then, it wasn't common for companies to, number one, definitely not pay you, but also definitely not appreciate you even sending them the information. Usually it would be met with like a legal notice or like whatnot, or a threat saying you're going to call the police. I get an email about 3 or 4 days later from this US company, and they're like, hey, look, we've looked at the security flaw you've just found, and it's so bad that it would kind of destroy our reputation. We'd like to send you $12,000. And I'm like, what? I thought it was a scam email. And I messaged them back, are you sure? Are you serious? And they're like, no, yeah. And they sent me $12,000. And then after that, they said, by the way, if you find anything else, please let us know because we'll pay you for that as well. And I didn't sleep for about 2 days, and I found like 5 more of the same criticality. And they came back to me and said, okay, look, we're going to have to stop this 12,000 for every one vulnerability because we're going to quickly run out of money. But yeah, that as soon as I saw that association and that mechanism, I realized, okay, I can actually get paid for this.
And had already been paid. So then you set up a company.
Yeah. Well, before I set up the company, there's a bit of a introduction to the security industry. So I'd been trying to get a job anywhere in an office, like, because I didn't want to, there's kind of a whole part that we didn't get a chance to go into where people around me, my age and people older than me who I'm associating with, they're going to prison for like 10 years at a time. They're being murdered. Like I've actually sat at tables with more than 5 people who have actually been like gangland murdered, right? And so for me, it wasn't far-fetched to think to myself, that is a possibility if I keep doing this. And so I wanted to get a job in an office because I knew I had a knack for computers, and by any means, I wanted to get a job in an office. I was applying for like reception jobs. I didn't care what it was. I just wanted to kind of get away from that. And so for 8 months, I remember calling hacking companies saying, hey, can I please have a job? I didn't exist on paper. Like I'd left school at 15, 16. And so I'm sitting in community service in a what we call in Australia an op shop, which is like a secondhand clothing store run by like churches and charities. And I'm sitting on, I've got like 200 hours community service. I just narrowly miss a prison sentence for getting into a serious fight in the city. And I get a phone call as I'm pulling out these like dirty underwear from this bin. Get a phone call. It's a guy called Andy, and he's like, "Hey man, you applied for a job like 8 months ago, and we just somehow found the application. We've got a spot in the team. Any chance you'd still be interested?" I'm like, "Shit, yeah! Like, let me sign up." I go to the job interview. The job is for this American security company called Tenable, and what they do is they develop software that's used by like the US military, the Navy, McDonald's, all these big enterprises. And the software looks for security flaws in other software. So it's like a scanner that finds holes.
Okay.
So that was my first ever job in security. And what was really interesting was within 6 months of being in that job, remembering my job was to manage this software that was used to find flaws. I had found flaws in the software that was used to find flaws, right?
Wow.
You would have thought they'd just use it on themselves, but that got attention from the CEO of the company I was at. And he pulled me into a room, a guy called Louis. He pulled me into a room and he's like, "Look, you're obviously a smart kid." I'm like 19 at this point. 19 or 20. Pulled me into the room. He said, "Look, you're a smart kid. Do you have any ideas for any business startups? Like, we can fund you." And I did say one thing, and I said to him, "Look, what's really interesting is you guys work for the banks. You work for the stock market. You do security testing for them. However, I can go in 10 minutes and talk to some of my old friends from that old world, and somehow they've still got your customers' data. There's a big gap there." I'm like, what if I use my skills and my connections in that world to go and get information about software vulnerabilities, stolen company information, and we rescue that information and take it back to these stock market, like big four banks, and they actually funded me to do that. That was my first company that I co-founded with them, and our specialty was going into these criminal ecosystems, extracting information, or sometimes just listening, seeing that they were planning an attack on, say, the stock market or planning fraud, and we'd capture that information and feed it back. One of our biggest...
And that would allow the company to take action before their information was stolen, or if it had already been stolen, to retrieve that information and expose the hacking company.
Or do what they needed to do, whether it was like resetting passwords or resetting credit card numbers.
So, from a layman's point of view, someone, whenever I get a message on my computer, as does thousands and millions of other people, sort of saying, "Reset your password," or my Google passwords tell me that, these passwords are vulnerable, etc., etc. Are we supposed to take notice of that?
Yeah, I mean...
Or is it just part of
if it's coming from a verifiable source, yes. But the problem is scammers and hackers, they know that, there are real companies sending you this stuff. So they try to make their messages look like the real thing.
Yeah. There's always something that kind of shines through. The company that you have now, what does it do? What's its name and what does it do?
So my company's name is Devon. And what happened was we ended up shutting down, even though we were very successful in the last company. There was some internal political disagreements. We shut down that company. I then realized that, okay, I have a specialized skill set that people will pay money for. And these people that will pay the money for my skill set are like, international banks, the stock market, federal government agencies. And I was like, let me create a company that allows me to keep honing those skills, because the way that technology and security works is that, what's current today is not going to be current tomorrow or the next day. So even to this day, I have to keep myself up to date and keep practicing. But yeah, so our company, we work mainly with like enterprise and government. And what we do is We get paid to find flaws in systems, and those systems could be digital. So they could be, websites, applications, mobile applications, or it could be security holes in processes. So just to give you an example of some of our clients, one of the clients we work with works with defensive battlefield technology. And when we do security testing for them, we've got to put ourselves in the shoes of an opposing soldier or an opposing government, where if we collect technology from the battlefield, whether it's through a dead body or just an abandoned vehicle, what could we find in that device or that technology that could be used back against the person? So a lot of my job is putting myself in the position of the people they're trying to protect against.
So you have to think and I suppose that works both ways, doesn't it? It's sounds like quite an intense, challenging, because if you have at your disposal all the resources you need to do that security testing, then you're ahead of the game. But if you don't have that and you're competing against governments who do have that, and I don't know, I'm not going to name any governments because I have no idea, it must prove really challenging. So how successful would you say your company has been at doing what you do?
I think, obviously, I'm biased. The best thing I can use is objective comparison. And the other day I walked into a meeting room with Australia's largest casino, and I spoke with an executive, a board member in the room, and it was the first time I've ever met this guy. And first of all, the reason I'm even getting an audience with this guy is because I had been able to find other problems with other casinos around the world. And so, that caught the first bit of attention. I was able to organize that meeting. But something he said to me will kind of answer the question that you asked in terms of our success. In this industry, there are well-established players who are like what they call the big four. So you've got the Deloittes, the PwCs, the CyberCXs, and that's the same all around the world. They're known for providing these type of services to the highest level of government, the highest, billion-dollar companies. So when a company like myself and my team come along as only 8 people, most billion-dollar companies are going to look at that as a risk. So why would we use this small company when we're used to using these big powerhouses? And something that he said to me, which is something I've heard a lot of my customers say, is that, there's something about the way that you guys do what you do that's very different to, these hot shots in suits coming from these big global, firms who may have learned how to hack through like a textbook or a university degree and can still hack, but what they're missing is the ability to think outside the box and to look at it as a real criminal. And when you think about it, that's why companies are paying all this money. They're trying to protect against criminals and nation-state adversaries. They're not trying to protect against security consultants. And so I'm the closest thing, and my team are the closest thing that they're going to get to a real cyber criminal, right? Because I've been in that situation.
And does that mean that a number of your team have also been on the criminal side of hacking?
In different elements, not as deeply as me,
right?
But I was having an interview a couple of months ago with a journalist, and they asked me, how do you decide who comes on your team? And I really had to think about this in what makes a good hacker. And there is this weird observation I've made, and it's not a golden rule, but it is quite true in my experience, where hacking, from what I've seen, people with some form of fire in their belly or some form of trauma who have a real need to hack because their life depends on it. If they've been in that situation for whatever many different reasons, they are the best hackers. So I try to hire people who need to hack for a certain reason rather than people who are just love security or love hacking. Even though that's good and important, there's got to be something deeper, because at 5:30 p.m. when all the other businesses are shutting down and going home, our customers need people who can jump out of bed at 2 a.m. in the morning and deal with something because actually, you know, they've been. I'll give you a perfect example. We were trying to hack this global bank, and I was recording a video of myself for like a vlog, and I realized something insightful that I said. It was 2 a.m. I'd finally got into this bank's network just a couple of weeks ago.
Isn't that illegal even to do it?
Oh, no, they've given us permission beforehand, yeah.
Okay.
So we've finally broken through, and I thought to myself, you know what's funny? I used to do this not for the $200,000 that I'm getting on this engagement. I used to sit here at 2 a.m. and do this for nothing, you know? And so you need people, back to your point about how do I find people? You need people who have learned how to hack because they had to, not just because they enjoy it.
Yeah. Finally, you are where you're at, but you've been on quite a roller coaster of a life, which you've shared with us. On reflection, when you think about your upbringing, your parents, the conversations you had with your dad, your uncles, and seeing all of that, where is your head at with all of your past now that you are in that successful place looking forward?
I've done a lot of reflection, and the lessons that I've taken from all of my past, like it is, I appreciate what I had to come through, and I appreciate it's different to anyone else's story because everyone's got a unique story. The main thing for me is that I don't want to have gone through that for no reason. And so I'm trying to find meaning in that, like, because there is a lot of like definable trauma in there. Even though I don't subscribe to a lot of mainstream like mental health kind of crazes, there's a lot that's happened there. And so I'm trying to get value from that by pulling out the lessons that I can. You know, I've got kids myself, and I've noticed that a lot of people in the world just kind of discredit themselves. So if I can use that to give them a bit more like comparison and belief in themselves. One of the things that I've realized in sharing my story is that I thought before I ever shared my story with people, the only type of people that would relate to my story would be other people who have grown up around crime and whatnot. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Like, I've had people come to me saying, hey, thank you for sharing that. I really resonated, even though comparatively they came from a very nice upbringing and whatnot. And so it taught me to respect the fact that you can never assume how people are going to resonate with the story. And so, yeah, that's what I've got from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in all the way from Australia. I know you've got a flight to get you back home tonight or tomorrow, whenever you will land. It's a pleasure listening to your story. It's even more inspiring to know that you've used what could have put you in prison for a very long time to better use and to create a career and a business, and challenge some of the established companies that do what you do, even though it's baffling to me, and I'm sure lots of other people who don't understand how cybersecurity works, even though we're kind of bombarded daily. I mean, we know how it works, you know, your identities, and people really do fear it at the moment. You know, we're constantly being told, protect your computer, change your password, don't do this, don't do that, making our digital lives, technology in how we live our lives really challenging. So it's been really insightful listening to the simple stuff. You know, there are people out there like you who are trying to prevent other people out there trying to nick people's identity and therefore their well-earned money. So thank you, Jamie, for coming in.
Thanks.
My final question, and we will stop, is there anything I've not asked you that you want to share?
Yeah, there's one thing that I think about a lot, and I like to talk about this because, you know, even though we didn't go into deep details about my story, a lot of people, including directly my family themselves, like my mother and father, they might think, you know, I don't blame them or anything for the struggles they had to go through. If anything, I'm thankful for the experience, because it's made me who I am today. So yeah, I just wanted to, anytime people ask me, how do you feel about, that circumstance? I think it's important that I respect them. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be sitting here in this world. So it's important to pay the respect to them and not discredit the struggles they had to go through.
I think that's such a lovely note to end it on. And I think it's a powerful message to those listening to this who are seeking their own second chance in life, to think about that message, which is don't blame your circumstances or people that come from circumstances that led to your experiences, etc., because it's not their fault.
Yeah.
And I think once you let that go, which is really interesting, once you let that go, it kind of frees you of the bitter or the anger that you might have towards a parent if you were neglected by that parent, abused by that parent, or you felt in your mind that you were, because you don't fully understand their background. So I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much, Jamie. Thank you. Thanks. Cut. Great stuff. That was really interesting.
Thanks, man.
And there's just never enough time, is there?
Thank you for watching or listening to the Second Chance podcast, where we share stories of redemption, hope, resilience, and second chances. Who deserves a second chance? Who has the right to give someone a second chance? And is a second chance even deserved? That's what Second Chance is all about. So subscribe if you want to be kept up to date with new episodes.